Welcome to you all. Welcome students, families, faculty, and staff, wiggly little brothers and sisters. We are so thrilled you're here with us tonight. I'm Jennifer Borman, Commonwealth's head of school, and tonight I have been dazzled, inspired, and transported. The word I used earlier today was gobsmacked by all of the artwork on our walls. It spans an impressive range of technique and subject matter and deep feeling, all produced by our young artists. I salute our students and want to particularly thank their teachers. Caleb Kolpitz for drawing, painting, and printmaking. Kyla Toomey with a little assist from Agnes, and Michael Bonadio. For ceramics and sculpture, and of course, Darren Corman, who teaches both film and digital photography. The arts have been central to Commonwealth since our founding in 1957. Charles Merrill used to famously take the whole school to the symphony or a play. And in fact, the non-student artwork on many of our walls was chosen by him or painted by him. We deeply value developing both our analytical faculties and our creative capacities. Even as we sharpen those number twos for advanced placement tests this week, we are surrounded by a different kind of excellence this evening. Tonight is a culmination, but throughout the year, the arts weave their way through our daily lives. Our ears are delighted by our chorus, chorale, and orchestra led by music teacher David Hodgkins. In 2 weeks, mark your calendars, our jazz musicians will hold their concert under the direction of the ever-groovy Mark Wright. And throughout the year, we've been moved by theatrical performances nurtured by Susan Thompson. We've also basked in the beauty of poetry readings, Shakespeare monologues, and the stories and poems from our creative writing class taught by Lisa Palmero. And lest we not forget, April is... I could go on, but I know you're eager to hear our featured speakers and poetry reciters. All 7 of these seniors have engaged with one or multiple art forms while students here. I've had the pleasure of teaching all of our seniors this year, and they are, to a person, inquisitive, inclusive, and interesting. I wish we could hear from all of them, but I know you will be delighted to hear from some of them. Let me begin by introducing Arjun Krishnan, who will be followed by Lizzy Wakefield, Rihanna Perry, Bella Wright, Dava Sitkoff, Olivia Wang, and Henry Levenson. Please give them your warmest welcome.
Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me, by the way? Is this good? Okay. Welcome to the art show. I really hope you're enjoying the wonderful amount of artwork around the building. When people ask me about my favorite artwork, I always tell them it's The Great Wave by Japanese painter Hokusai. I'm just endlessly fascinated by the massive surf of water with 9 shades of blue towering over Mount Fuji. But in reality, no matter how wonderful Hokusai's wave is, my favorite is a much more modest artwork, one not found in the Met or the Louvre, but right here in the Commonwealth building, between the 4th and 5th floor on the Dartmouth side of the stairs. In fact, it's right here. At first glance, it might just look like an ordinary painting, but it holds a very, very special place in my heart. The subject of this work looks exactly like my grandfather, Captain Krishnamurti Vaidyanathan, or as I like to call him, Tata. It's pretty uncanny, down to the mustache, the hair. If I showed this to anyone in my family, they'd think that this was a portrait of Tata. He was a special man. You might have heard me call him Captain, and that's because he was a pilot. He was in the Indian Air Force, part of the 33rd Squadron, and then later joined Air India. He had a unrelenting passion for aviation. He could talk about it for hours and hours on end. And when me and my brother were younger, we used to go to air shows with him almost every month. He and my grandma, who's actually in the crowd today, were like second parents to us. Whenever I saw him, we did this little salute before a big embrace. And with his charming smile, his incredible wit, and let me tell you, his perfect hair, it was impossible not to like him. Now, when I was 13, I asked my mom if I could go to boarding school. It seemed like such a cool concept. Living with friends, what could be better? But, well, my mom reluctantly agreed, and I was soon headed to Marlborough College, Malaysia, to start a new phase of my life. When I reached, it was a Saturday at around 11 p.m. I was admitted to campus, shown my room, and left completely alone. And all of a sudden, it dawned on me. I was scared, and I was on my own. I was jet lagged, so I couldn't sleep, and I stayed up terrified of this new place that I was entering. I picked up my phone, and the first person I thought to call was Tata. I rang him and said on the verge of tears, I miss everyone, I miss home, what am I doing here? And he told me words that I would never forget. Never be afraid of a new environment. It just means you get the joy of meeting new people and trying new things. This was a man who went to new places for a living. So I took his message to heart and I dove myself into my boarding school environment. Calling him became a habit. I called Tata every time I came home from a break. And we'd always have the same conversation about getting involved in new things. I always knew I could call him because he believed I could do great things just like he did. 3.5 years pass, and I find myself about to move to a new, weirdly small school called Commonwealth. 3 days before I was set to move to Boston, I asked Tata again. I asked him the same types of questions. What if people don't like me? What if I'm not smart enough? And he reassured me the same way. He told me to try everything, talk to everyone, and truly find my calling at the school. It was one of the most enjoyable and loving conversations I'd had with him. And unfortunately, it was our last. He passed away the very next day. It was hard not having Tata during my time at Commonwealth, which is exactly why this painting is so special to me. Through all the things I do at this school, all the concepts I've learned, the teams I've led, the people I've met, I know Tata has been watching me proudly. And every time I walk between the 4th and 5th floor, I make sure to give this painting a salute, to let him know that I'm doing it all because of him. Now, I'm headed to the concrete jungle, New York. And that's scary. But as all of us seniors embark on this new experience that is college, I hope we take Tata's words to heart. Go in, not scared, but fearless. Be yourself and leave your mark on the world. Thank you very much.
We good on sound? All right. Hi, I'm Lizzy. My first day of high school was in April. I started at the Commonwealth building in September of 2020, but the first real day was on April 29th in 2021 when the building reopened for all students. I remember that first day viscerally, when Commonwealth became an entirely new place, and suddenly the previous months of hybrid learning felt like a failed attempt at school. Back then, I rarely initiated new conversations. I was engaged in my classes, but overall secluded and quiet. And these days, when I'm here, I never shut up. I'm comfortable and confident in this building and in this community, and in a lot of ways, when I'm here, I'm at home. That sense of home appears in so many ways, from my wonderful and caffeine-fueled advisor meetings with Anna, to the chaos and joy of running GSA and knitting cult, to the Dartmouth lobby and the basement elevator room. And so that I don't ramble endlessly, I want to focus on my experience of change at Commonwealth. Though several of my classes have remained the same, such as all 4 years of computer science and art classes with Caleb, for me, they've transformed a lot. I spent many nights of that apocalyptic freshman year in tears over my CS1 homeworks, terrified of not knowing the answers or judging my half-filled sketchbook of impatient drawings. And yet here I am now, unabashedly asking Mr. Singer endless questions in CS4. And though the concepts are much trickier, I'm loving it now. And this semester, I spent all of my printmaking time working on one intaglio copper plate, filling it with hundreds of tiny flowers and enjoying myself and allowing myself to enjoy the wacky inconsistencies rather than criticizing them. One of the other 4 art classes I'm taking this year is beginning ceramics with Kyla. And as anyone in the studio with me could tell you, I'm a bit of a disaster. All year, I've shown up to class and I've failed over and over again, and because of that, I'm learning a lot. I'm making slow progress. I threw a mug on the wheel a couple of weeks ago, which was my first such success. And more importantly, I'm having so much fun up there, regardless of what does or doesn't get made. At Commonwealth, I learned how to fail. That didn't happen all of a sudden. In fact, a few years ago, when selecting pieces for this art show, I remember saying to Caleb that I didn't know what to put in because I didn't like anything that I had made. And I'm certain that if I took ceramics my freshman year, I would have still been haunted by that same perfectionism and self-criticism that shadowed my first drawing and painting class. I would have treated every messy clay blob as an irredeemable failure. Thankfully, my perspective's a lot different now than it was back then. And while by no means is all of my art good or even complete, I've since learned that everything I make is worth making, even if it isn't worth keeping. I try to carry that with me, the ability to focus on the enjoyment and growth of something rather than getting stuck on the completion of it. I've realized that idea applies to almost everything. In a project for the Science and Art of Materials, I investigated how a pigment, Prussian blue, interacts with sodium hydroxide, which is a strong base. And as it turns out, the blue solution almost instantly turns a transparent orange. And due to the complexity of the process and of that, there was no way to know exactly what was happening and what was causing that crazy color change. But rather than feeling defeated, I determined a partial conclusion. The Prussian blue was being destroyed when I added the base. And I followed that up with a long conversation with Mr. Wolf and came up with more specific theories about the experiment. And despite never having a perfect explanation, it was absolutely worth it to explore the possibilities of what was going on. And I ended up learning so much more than I would have if I had given up when there wasn't going to be just one answer. I've also changed how I think about CS. And it took me a really long time, but now it's much more important to me that I understand a problem rather than how I understand it. I used to not ask questions and force myself to figure things out on my own, but that was counterproductive. And I now know that it's much more efficient to ask the questions, and it's much more fun to program without trying to find every solution alone. And now I'm heading into a college CS program with excitement and confidence that I didn't have before. Because at Commonwealth, I also learned how to succeed. I spent all of my years at Commonwealth playing soccer and basketball and frisbee, and while I couldn't forget how magical it felt to finally beat BUA if I tried, what I'll hold on to most from all of those years of sports happened in March. Right before senior break, 3 freshmen, Jasmine, B, and Angelina, surprised me with these little letters to thank me for being a good captain. And that was already way too sweet for me to handle. But beyond that, B and Angelina had written that my encouragement helps them feel welcomed and comfortable as new players on a really big soccer team. And Jasmine told me that my kindness and commitment helped her slay on the basketball court with more confidence. It meant so much to me to be handed a little pile of moments where my care and contributions to those teams had made their experiences better. Because those notes forced me to grapple with the fact that I impacted the 3 of them in a positive way, which would have been so hard for me to acknowledge just for myself. And rather than hoping that I was helping make those spaces better, or going as far as to deny that as even a possibility, I was forced to make space for and appreciate the fact that my leadership on those teams was a success. I don't know how to summarize what being together in the space has brought me. And I don't know what challenges college is going to throw my way, be it difficult classes or people or something else entirely unpredictable. But I think I can handle it because I'm ready to approach failure somewhat comfortably, and I trust that I'm capable of owning my own successes. Because of Commonwealth, I became someone with some idea of what I want and where I want to be and who I want to be around, and I became someone who, at least for now, knows who she is. My name is Rihanna, and I will be reading a love poem for lonely prime numbers by Harry Baker. 59 wakes up on the wrong side of the bed, realizes all his hair is on one side of his head, takes just under a minute to work out that it's because of the way that he slept. He finds some clothes and gets dressed. He can't help but look in the mirror and be subtly impressed. How he looks rough around the edges and yet casually messed. And as he glances out the window, he sees the sight that he gets blessed with of 60 from across the street. Now 60 was beautiful. With perfectly trimmed cuticles, dressed in something suitable, never rude or crude at all. Unimprovable, right on time as usual, more on cue than a snooker ball, but likes to play it super cool. 59 wanted to tell her that he knew her favorite flower. He thought of her every second, every minute, every hour, but he knew it wouldn't work. He'd never get the girl, because although she lived across the street, they came from different worlds. While 59 admired 60's perfectly round figure, 60 thought 59 was odd. One of his favorite films was 101 Dalmatians. She preferred the sequel. He romanticized the idea they were star-crossed lovers. They could overcome the odds and evens because they had each other. While she maintained the strict views imposed on her by her mother, that separate could not be equal. And though, at the time, he felt stupid and dumb for trying to love a girl controlled by her stupid mum, he should have been comforted by the simple sum. Take 59 away from 60, and you're left with the one. Sure enough, after 2 months of moping around, 61 days later, 61 was who he found. He had lost his keys and his parents were out, so one day after school he went into a house. As he noticed the slightly wonky numbers on the door, he wondered why he'd never introduced himself before. As she let him in, his jaw dropped in awe. 61 was like 60, but a little bit more. She had prettier eyes and an approachable smile. And like him, rough around the edges, casual style. And like him, everything was in disorganized piles. And like him, her mom didn't mind if friends stayed a while, because she was like him and he liked her. He reckoned she would like him if she knew he was like her, and it was different this time. I mean, this girl was wicked. So he plucked up the courage and asked for her digits. She said, "I'm 61. He grinned, said, "I'm 59. Today I've had a really nice time, so tomorrow, if you wanted, could you come over to mine?" She said, "Sure." She loved talking to someone just as quirky. She agreed to this unofficial first date. In the end, he was only ready 1 minute early, but it didn't matter because she arrived 1 minute late. And from that moment on, there was non-stop chatter, how they loved X Factor, how they had 2 factors, how that did not matter. Distinctiveness made them better. By the end of the night, they knew they were meant together. And one day, she was talking about stuck up 60. She noticed that 59 looked a bit shifty. He blushed, told her of his crush. The best thing, that never happened because it led to us. 61 was clever, see, not prone to jealousy.
She looked him in the eyes and told him quite tenderly, "You're 59, I'm 61. Together, we combine to become twice what 60 could ever be." At this point, 59 had tears in his eyes, was so glad to have this one-of-a-kind girl in his life. He told her the very definition of being prime was that with only one and himself could his heart divide, and she was the one he wanted to give his heart to. She said she felt the same, and now she knew the films were half true, because that wasn't real love. That love was just a sample. When it came to real love, they were a prime example. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bella Wright, and I want to thank Ms. Tyson for helping me write this speech. Thank you. And Eve Shapiro for giving me wonderful, thorough feedback on it. So, growing up, I judged art based on how closely it mirrored life. When I drew, my goal was to have my drawing look as close as possible to what I was seeing. The purpose of art, to me, was to preserve an object in my sketchbook. I was pretty aware of my shortcomings. I understood that it was necessary to label my drawings, like leaf, L-E-F, but there was no doubt in my mind that an accurate representation of what I was seeing was possible. It was just a far-off goal. I thought that in order for art to be good, you had to be able to communicate a concrete idea to the viewer. I remember being upset when my parents couldn't tell what I had drawn. One time, right as I was about to sort of transcend the labeling stage, I showed my parents a picture that I've drawn of what was really a bunch of circles, and I asked them if they could tell what it was. They did not have either of the two correct answers, which were Button Factory and Joanne Fabrics, which I thought were synonymous. So I was very upset, and I wrote Bouton Factory on it to prevent future confusion. When I got to Commonwealth, I still had that instinct to prevent mystery. Uncertainty made me uncomfortable. I wanted to tackle everything and to understand it as quickly and as thoroughly as I could. I quickly understood, and I quickly learned that this was either just not possible or wasn't going to happen for me. But I think what really made me okay with that, with being in a state of exploration, with being in a state of not knowing, was art. In my first year here, I started using my morning Green Line ride to sketch people. Since transience is just sort of a truth of the subway, I had to sketch pretty loosely, knowing that my subject could get off at any stop, unless it was Boylston, in which case they probably would not get off. I knew that there was no way to grasp the full complexity of a person's appearance in 15 minutes, so I didn't try to. Rather than enshrining a person's entire character in my sketchbook, my goal became to simply start, to capture some little aspect of them. And I found certain luxury in this, in releasing the expectation that I can completely represent something. I look at the person and I try to capture something, but with the understanding that there's no way to complete this process, that I only really can capture a fragment of their existence. So there's a painting outside of room 4C that I've spent a lot of time looking at and very little time understanding. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's made up of green and blue and red, and it has very dark darks and very light lights. There are 3 cartoon-like figures in it. Each of them has a flashlight in their left hand and is holding up their right hand in such a way that makes it unclear whether or not they're praying or fighting or singing or dancing. And the figure in the front is a young girl engulfed in shadow. And all 3 figures have their eyes closed. I used to stand in the hallway before math class staring at that painting. I loved thinking about it because there were just so many possibilities as to what could be going on. Just like the people in the painting, I was sort of leisurely pointing my flashlight around in various directions, thinking about it and looking for some meaning within it, but understanding there was no end to that process. There was not a correct conclusion to come to. The painting itself is called Family, Searching for What? They have flashlights. I mean, they haven't given up looking for meaning, but there's a certain freedom or release in their postures. They're not in a rush to find something. It would have been silly for me to go into math class with this perspective. To be pointing my flashlight out the window saying, oh, the joy of not knowing the answer. I did, in fact, have to figure out how to decipher polar graphs. but I did not have to figure out what was happening. But I did not have to figure out what was happening in that painting, and it was beneficial for me not to. I spent most of my life thinking that satisfaction and enjoyment comes from discovery, comes from that moment when everything clicks, and undervaluing the times when that's not the case. The longer that I've been at this school, the more I've fallen in love with that painting, because it reminds me that not everything is better when it's understood. I've learned how to let things be mysterious. I think that holding on to the idea that people and ideas can be fully understood, always trying to reach that point where we get something or we get a person, prevents us from being in awe of each other. I think some of the most exciting experiences, like painting or making new friends or being in love, involve not understanding things completely and staying in that state of wonder. So, thank you.
Hi, my name is, oh. You good? All right. Hi, my name is Dava Sitkoff. After my first English class at Commonwealth, I concluded that I no longer knew how to read. Miss Tyson had put us to work right away, handing out a poem, A Narrow Fellow in the Grass by Emily Dickinson. After a few moments to read and annotate, the latter of which I'd never done before, Miss Tyson asked us a question. What is this poem about? What makes A Narrow Fellow in the Grass such a fantastic choice for the first day of freshman year is that you need to read it carefully to answer that question. Looking back, it seems obvious to me that the poem is about a snake. But hidden beneath the 19th century language and rhetorical devices, relevant imagery is easily lost to a reader who is skimming. And, while everybody else dutifully annotated, I had sat and waited, self-satisfied in an insufferably 14-year-old way for having finished it so fast. But what was the poem about? As simple as the question seemed, I didn't know. The little crisis I had that night, feeling like I no longer knew how to read, turns out to be a common experience for first-year Commonwealth students. But with time, I began to notice the nuances of language that had flown over my head when I first read A Narrow Fellow in the Grass. I started thinking of my tendency to read fast as a trap rather than a point of pride. And as I relearned how to read, I relearned how to write. As far as I know, Commonwealth is unusual in teaching students to apply close reading to true prose. While my friends at other schools wrote essays on The Great Gatsby as a whole book, analyzing its themes, characters, and historical context, my peers and I wrote our Gatsby essay zooming in on the word choice of individual paragraphs, able to argue something real and convincing about an excerpt of only a couple sentences. Just as English 9 taught me a new way to think, so did U.S. history with Miss Haber, in which we're encouraged to consider that maybe we as high schoolers could have something totally original to say. As long as our reasoning was logically consistent, Ms. Haber encouraged ideas that were a little out there, helping us develop a self-assured, hypercritical way of thinking through which we could weave together interpretations of history far more complicated and controversial than you'd ever find in a textbook. For the most part, this sort of analytical thinking that Commonwealth teaches its students ends up serving us very well. Graduates find themselves equipped with close reading as a figurative surgical scalpel, a tool with which we go out into the world especially able to dissect language, ideas, and arguments. And usually that's a good thing. Commonwealth students become the type of people who think critically about how an advertisement is presented, who notice the little word choices that indicate bias in a newspaper article. When assembly speakers who come to Commonwealth open up the floor for questions, they're either very impressed by our thoughtful, incisive ideas, or they stumble as we pick their rhetoric apart. But I do think there's one way in which, ironically, learning to read, write, and think with such precision actually becomes an obstacle for Commonwealth students. Many of us forget how to turn it off. Often, in chats with alumni, I hear the same thing, that Commonwealth ruined their ability to read for pleasure. At first, that made... Okay. At first, that made no sense to me. Wouldn't learning to pay attention to detail make reading more enjoyable? But now that I've sharpened my own close reading surgical scalpel against the whetstone of at least 30 essays, I find myself experiencing the same thing. Reading word by word and annotating every paragraph has become my default mode, and now I don't really know how to stop. While I've built up my close reading muscles, my skimming ones have atrophied, and getting through longer texts has become an uphill battle. Others have experienced something similar when it comes to creative writing. I know many people who thought of themselves as writers when they started here before realizing later that they just couldn't write anything anymore. As I learned to close read, I began to experience this too. If the use of passive voice or chiasmus was enough to make or break an interpretation, if so much meaning was dependent on such microscopic choices, how was I ever supposed to communicate exactly what I wanted to say? There must exist, I decided, an ideal form of any piece of writing, some hypothetical version that was the most accurate to whatever I was trying to get across. I've always loved creative writing, but around my junior year, every time I started something new, I began to close read my own sentences before they were finished. This resulted in Notes app documents full of different ways to say the same thing, big and complex ideas turned stillborn by my inability to decide on the word choice of a single phrase. But of all the examples of Commonwealth students overusing hyperlogical, analytical thinking, my favorite, or I guess least favorite, is effective altruism. For those unfamiliar, effective altruism is a philanthropic movement popular among Commonwealth alumni that believes there exists a most efficient and logical way to do good. According to an effective altruist, the best way to give is to contribute only to causes where the smallest amount of money will improve the most people's lives. For example, mosquito nets cost only a few cents each to produce, but can save the lives of entire families. So an effective altruist would prioritize buying mosquito nets over, say, donating to childhood cancer research where any given dollar is unlikely to make a difference. And sure, it's good when donating money to think about how useful it's actually going to be. Taking that same logic to its extremes, though, by taking a day off of work to visit your dying grandparents, you're doing something that is morally bad. Think of how many people you could save from malaria with the money you could make by going to work and letting your grandparents suffer without you. What kind of monster prioritizes the momentary happiness of 2 people over the lives of 20 families? Now, the thing that's so frustrating to me about effective altruism is that technically it's not wrong. It's a flawlessly reasoned through doctrine, a perfect geometry proof. You can't really argue against it with logic and win. But doesn't a system in which you shouldn't visit your dying grandparents just feel like an awful system? It's internally consistent and logically irrefutable, but it just feels terrible. So what do we do with all this? Obviously, the answer isn't to stop teaching Commonwealth students close reading. Instead, I think we just need to be a little better at regulating it. This is something that I've been trying recently to learn myself, turning on the close reading brain when I need to write an essay for English, and turning it off when my siblings want to watch a badly written movie so I can enjoy it with them without being a curmudgeon about the terrible dialogue. Earlier this year, I began experimenting with what I like to call whiny first world problem poetry, poems about smaller things I'm annoyed about, with titles like, I really do not like the green line at rush hour, or there is a centipede in my bathroom and I think it's going to bite me. The nice thing about these poems is that it doesn't really matter to me whether they effectively convey what I'm trying to say, because what I'm trying to say just doesn't feel so important. And in being able to just write anything again, I've started to get comfortable with writing other stuff too. So that's the advice I give to my peers. Use that analytical scalpel you have so finely sharpened, but use it judiciously. Most of the time, go forth and destroy terrible arguments, notice minute details, seek efficiency and perfection to your heart's content. But every once in a while, let yourself not do that. Let things be meaningless. Skim through a book of questionable literary merit. Give to causes that you personally care about, even if they aren't the most important thing the world is facing. Write a silly poem about your first world problems. Let things just be. Your enjoyment of life and your grandparents will thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Olivia Wang, and I have 2 poems here for you. Meditation on a Grapefruit by Craig Arnold. To wake when all is possible, before the agitations of the day have gripped you. To come to the kitchen and peel a little basketball for breakfast. To tear the husk like cotton padding, a cloud of oil misting out of its pinprick pores, clean and sharp as pepper. To ease each pale pink section out of its case so carefully without breaking a single pearly cell. To slide each piece into a cold blue china bowl, the juice pooling until the whole fruit is divided from its skin. And only then to eat so sweet a discipline, precisely pointless, a devout involvement of the hands and senses, a pause, a little emptiness. Each year harder to live within, each year harder to live without. Enough by Suzanne Buffam. I am wearing dark glasses inside the house to match my dark mood. I have left all the sugar out of the pie. My rage is a kind of domestic rage. I learned it from my mother, who learned it from her mother before her, and so on. Surely the Greeks had a word for this. Now surely the Germans do. The more words a person knows to describe her private sufferings, the more distantly she can perceive them. I repeat the names of all the cities I've known and watch an ant drag its crooked shadow home. What does it mean to love the life we've been given? To act well the part that's been cast for us? Wind, light, fire, time. A train whistles through the far hills. One day, I plan to be riding it. Thank you.
I like to think I have good taste. Not in everything, of course. So far, my fashion exploration has been limited to different shades of khaki. And my Spotify playlists are filled with saccharine 2010s pop. But in a few creative endeavors, fine art, writing, film, and especially food, I know what looks good, what feels good, and what tastes good to me. It's been relatively easy and even enjoyable to cultivate my taste over the years. I've visited the MFA, gawking at Grecian urns and Edo period porcelain. I've explored the city and decided that the Boston Public Library is gorgeous and the Boston City Hall is not. And beyond learning what I appreciate, I've learned to communicate that appreciation using fancy words like kitsch and camp and camphorous to share my experiences with others. In fact, I bet most of you have pretty stellar taste too. Your interests may be different from mine, but whether you're into serif fonts or retro cars, forming opinions about art is a skill most of us have mastered. And today, our tastes are better than they've ever been. We have access to an endless portfolio of art from around the world to consume and critique. And alongside this infinite digital museum, we have apps like Yelp and Letterboxd to practice reviewing this art, broadcasting our preferences to the world. Don't get me wrong, I judge art as much as anyone. Anyone who sat next to me on the Dartmouth couches has probably heard a loud proclamation of my opinion on some strange subject. Somehow, just in the last week, I've managed to not only see, but to form surprisingly strong opinions on Japanese minimalist dancing, Yugoslavian Mexican fusion music, and a very mediocre Will Ferrell movie. For us Commonwealth students, as if our tastes weren't already sharp enough, our academics hone them down like the fine tip of a freshly sharpened pencil. We spend hours in English class each week carefully dissecting what the AP lovingly calls works of literary merit, learning the intricacies of their plot and structure. Throughout my time here, I've learned to wield the tools of close reading not only on novels, but on historical documents, religious texts, and even the shape of Back Bay's alleys. For everyone, but for Commonwealth students in particular, our taste in art and creative works is excellent. So when we go to make art ourselves, we know exactly what we like, and we want to make more of it. When I hiked up to the 5th floor ceramic studio for the first time, I knew I wanted to make functional minimalist pottery, like the cups I drink out of daily, many of them thrown by my own grandmother. Yet, unsurprisingly, when I first went to throw on the wheel, a gorgeous Mackenzie-inspired form did not flow forth from my fingers. In fact, to even call my earliest cups would probably be a disservice to the word. That day, I found the gap between my taste and my skill. Of course, this gap exists far beyond the ceramic studio. We at Commonwealth scrutinize Shakespeare year after year, yet no one professes to exceed the bard in their own plays. In STEM, we might consider the difference between understanding a proof or a scientific discovery and actually making that proof or that discovery in the first place. We all know the feeling of turning in work knowing that it didn't live up to our own expectations of what it could be. We could just ignore the gap, avert our eyes from the abyss between our art and the art that we admire, or we could make excuses for that chasm, pretending to have crossed it. Maybe that lopsided plate I made sophomore year was actually a postmodern masterpiece. But believe me, it was not. Rather than ignore that gap or give up on bridging it entirely, the arts require us to undertake the arduous task across it head on, whether we like it or not. In ceramics classes, failed mug after misshapen Halloween ceramic pumpkin, after another failed mug, I've slowly built up the skills of a potter. I've learned to center, pull, and form the formless clay into delicate vessels. I'm still no master, and my work still falls well short of my taste. But it's a hell of a lot better than it was 4 years ago. Mind you, I certainly haven't given up on sharpening my taste. You'll still hear me on the 1st floor Dartmouth couches, loudly opining on whatever exotic media I last came across. But up on the 5th floor, I've learned the new skill, not of criticism, but of creation.
Thank you all so much for coming tonight. We will end with a beloved Commonwealth tradition. If you wouldn't mind, chairs against the wall.